Hello and welcome to the weekly news programme in English on First Ukraine. My name is Tom Bell. Let's start this evening with news about two Ukrainian political prisoners freed from Russian captivity. 25-year-old Hennady Afanasyev and 74-year-old Yuri Soloshenko returned home on Tuesday. The two men were exchanged for two other Ukrainians who were held on separatism charges over their role in a Russian-sponsored so-called council in the region of Odessa. In their first message on Ukrainian soil, both men expressed their gratitude for all the support they had received. First Ukraine's correspondent Olga Tkachenko has this report.
The plane carrying Ukrainian political prisoners landed in Boryspil airport on Tuesday morning. Both of them, although in different time, were arrested in Russia and blamed in grave offenses. Right from the airport, Yuri Soloshenko and Hennady Afanasyev were transported to the Presidential Administration Hospital located in capital city center. In clinic, released political prisoners were awaited by their relatives, journalists and volunteers. Ukraine's president also came to visit them. 74-year-old Yuri Soloshenko has counted each day of not being in Ukraine. He was detained in Moscow early last year and being accused of spying, got 6 years of imprisonment. In front of the hospital, former captive told that his aspirations has finally become true. 1 year, 10 months and 10 days I've been waiting for this moment, believed and hoped for it to come. Despite of the constant threatening that my country forgot about me, that the council refused to meet with me, or that it would be better for me to obtain Russian citizenship, because in this case I would be defended not as an accused, but as a witness. You know what Mr. Soloshenko is dreaming about? He asked me to tell if the season of strawberry and black cherry was over. I said no, and my assistants brought strawberry and cherry. So if the doctors allow, we could treat him with the most delicious Ukrainian strawberries and cherries. As for Hennady Afanasyev, he was detained 2 years ago in Crimea together with Alexei Sentsov, but was a bit more lucky in contrast to the latter. Afanasyev received 7 years of imprisonment for alleged creation of terrorist group on the peninsula. Now being born out of lasting detention and grave disease, he still stands for other political prisoners, calling on world community to push Russia for their immediate release. I went through the tortures and pain and saw much of it from many other people. I ask you not to drop the sanctions, but to continue such policy and do not lift anything. Because of you, we are here. Thank you. And with your help might come back Alexei Sentsov, Alexander Kolchenko and other Ukrainian political prisoners.
Украинские политарештанты.
I have many acknowledgements to many people, which I'll be telling them for many days. Despite of such sorrow, I've got many friends, including common people, journalists, and certainly our diplomatic officials. And first of all, I would like to say once again, thank you to President Petro Poroshenko for helping us. It was reported that Afanasyev and Soloshenko were arranged to be exchanged on the organizers and participants of the so-called Bessarabia People's Republic in Odessa. They are the journalists Elena Glishchinskaya and Vitaly Didenko, whom Ukraine accuses of separatism and claims them to be Russian agents. According to Ukraine's Secret Service, Bessarabia People's Republic is a project of Russian special forces aiming to destabilize Odessa region. The same scenario as in Donbass was meant to be fulfilled, creating Russia-backed self-proclaimed republic with a puppet government.
Well, as Mr. Afanasyev said in the report, he thinks Ukraine should continue to pressure the Kremlin to release more Ukrainian prisoners, political prisoners held in Russia. And I'm pleased to welcome on the show today Bogoslaw Yeremenko, a foreign policy analyst and a former diplomat. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Tom. Nice to be with you, and congratulations with your new project.
Oh, thank you. So let's start. It's good news this week, and also recently we had Nadia Savchenko coming back to Ukraine. You're an experienced diplomat, so what sorts of strategies do you think the government should have to continue to put pressure on Moscow to release the remaining hostages?
Well, I believe that the releases that we already saw, and we're quite happy to have at least 3 Ukrainian not prisoners, but I would rather call them hostages, because they've been arrested and tortured without any good reason or any reason whatsoever. So those releases, I believe it's already the result of their political agreements that were reached on the highest possible levels, and we witnessed the political diplomatic pressure that basically the whole civilized humankind pressed upon President Putin and his administration. So, and I believe this is the response of Russian politics, or Russian president, and a part of their political game to, if not to basically cancel the sanctions, then at least to ease them, to cancel the part of those sanctions that already been applied against Russian Federation. It looks like that President Putin is trying to play the game. He's been accused of not implementing the Minsk agreement. And there are some things that he really needs to do to impress the whole, basically, humankind and the parties opposing him at the table of negotiations of doing something positive. So those releases probably is something President Putin will try to use to bargain the next steps on behalf of the European Union and United States in the context of sanctions.
Yeah, and it's important for Ukraine to actually continue to highlight these captives or hostages in Russia. So what sort of efforts are being made on a broader scale to highlight the Crimeans, Tatars especially, who are still being kept there? Because, for example, now there's a lot of world events. We have Islamic State and migrant crisis. So how can Ukraine bring this maybe topic to the top of the agenda? Almost.
Well, first of all, we need to tell the stories of Madame Savchenko, Mr. Soloshenko, and Mr. Afanasyev to the outer world. Because I just read the interview. They just, of course, they've been just released yesterday or 2 days ago, and they didn't even have a time to speak to their relatives. But there are already some interviews coming out, and it's terrifying what they survived in the Russian prisons. The beating, and very brutal beating, was the less horrifying part of the tortures that they survived. So the electricity, the gas masks, and everything else, the Abu Ghraib looks like a fairy tale in comparison with what those gentlemen are telling us. So we need to tell those stories. We need to continue diplomatic pressure, to do everything that's already been done, and to continue to basically to level the pressure, political pressure on the Russian Federation, to make our Ukrainian case to the outer world that this is not really a wise policy to ease the sanctions, to lift a part of those sanctions against the Russian Federation until the whole Minsk agreement, the whole package be implemented. Because it looks like that President Putin is looking for some positive signals that he will later sell to his internal public. And he will also reach some success in trying to break the diplomatic and political blockade.
Which is what he's trying to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, we shouldn't be allowing him to do this. And this is a Ukrainian case which should be clearly and loudly sent to the outer world. This is the wrong practice to basically to inspire a dictator and the leader of the country invading neighboring countries with the hope that he might escape their necessity to answer the questions.
And it must be tough for Ukraine to come up with an effective strategy as well, because it must be difficult for the country to still support Crimean Tatars who are being persecuted, their homes are raided, and we have this ATR TV channel. So
this is again the separate case which needed to be broadcasted to the outer world clearly. The story with the Crimean Tatars is exactly what has happened to Savchenko, Sentsov, Kolchenko, Afanasyev, and other prisoners. But in this case, we're talking about the whole nation, the ethnic group, which has been prosecuted. And basically, this already surviving something of the genocide. So they are not allowed to live their lives just of being Crimean Tatars, just of expressing their will to continue their practices, to continue to be, to have the right for their political views.
Okay.
Not to accept the annexation and occupation of Crimea. And this is enough for Russian Federation to start the terrible campaign of prosecuting the people, destroying their structures, their organizations, prosecuting their leaders, not allowing them to enter Crimea. Right now we basically surviving this nation, and and surviving, and we see the next stage of Russian campaign against the Crimean Tatars, the massive arrests. The arrests that taking place on the massive scale. Of course, we're talking about the activists, so they're not arresting like Mr. Stalin did the whole nation. But we understand that in our world, it's with informational technologies, it's easier to create the campaign, just sending the signals what would happen to the rest of the people if their leaders, political leaders, are arrested and have no rights.
So there's a lot of stuff to do. Okay.
Yes, this is another, again, I believe United Nations, the Council of Europe, OSCE, European Union, those organizations should be basically approached on the regular basis with the information, with the ideas of and suggestions of the reaction. This is something we cannot allow to happen because it's another genocide in today's Europe.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for that. And very soon I want to speak to you about the Minsk agreement. There's some developments this week, so we can talk about that soon. Thank you. Coming up, news about NATO's latest military exercises in Eastern Europe. First, though, a new photo exhibition about captive Ukrainians in Russia has opened in Kiev. Anton Nyamlyuk, a correspondent from Radio Liberty's Russian service, is spearheading the project. He hopes the photos will shine a spotlight on what he calls the prisoners of the Kremlin. The recent release of captives, including Nadia Savchenko, Hennady Afanasyev and Yuri Soloshenko, have brought more hope hostages will be home soon. However, there are scores more forgotten prisoners still held by Moscow, as one of First Ukraine's correspondents recently found out.
These photos are the only thing that for Time knew about Stanislav Klich, his niece Lesia Sinch. I followed Anton's publications on Facebook, and frankly speaking, only by virtue of Anton and other journalists who were brave enough to go to Grozny to the trial, we could find out such important information for us. Anton Nyamlyuk, the author of the photos, was with the heroes of his photo reports at the first opportunity, and now he looks back at the most dramatic moments. It was the case of Savchenko. At the same time, the trial of Sergei Litvinov was held, the man who was accused of mass murder and sexual assault, and in his case were mentioned even Kolomoisky, who supposedly gave money for murder, and Avakov, who gave orders to organize a genocide of peaceful population of Lugansk region. Every photo has its own story. Anton Nyamlyuk cannot but tell these stories. Among all other, he thinks back about Russian journalists, says they prepared provocative and untruthful stories about Ukrainian colleagues and then calmly worked together with them. Also, he says he remembers the day of the court's verdict for Sentsov and Kolchenko. It was impossible to look at Sentsov and Kolchenko, who stood embraced and sang the anthem, while the court sentenced them to a very long term of imprisonment. All people were crying. Those who were watching the process just stood still, filmed and cried. More than 30 photos and 4 landmark cases, but only few surnames are known. Anton Nyamlyuk only started to tell the story of so-called injustice, but there are much more names in this list of illegally imprisoned in Russia. Today there are 29 because another 2 people came back, Gennady Afanasyev and Yuri Soloshenko. And we hope that this number, the number of released people, will increase. And maybe one day this exhibition will become not the exhibition of the imprisoned, but those who was restored the freedom. The exhibition Court of the Absurd will last till 22nd of June in the Crimea House.
So the release of Ukrainian political prisoners or hostages has been important and very prominent this week in the headlines, and it all forms part of the Minsk ceasefire agreement. The second version was signed in February 2015, and we're joined now by our guest, Bogoslaw Yeremenko, to explain what more could be done to enforce this. So, in your view, many people think that the actual original Minsk ceasefire deal is unrealistic. For example, taking back the borders, the full withdrawal of weapons. What sort of problems would this create? In your view, is this realistic?
Well, first of all, let's start from the reaction of Ukrainian society, because this is the Ukrainian society which needs Ukrainian nation to implement this agreement. It's highly unpopular, the Minsk agreement. More than 80% of Ukrainians are standing fairly against their agreements and do not believe that it will lead us to peace. And they are right because we see that there is no such a thing as a ceasefire taking place in the east of Ukraine. Later on, the Minsk agreement is not covering the issue of Crimea. So it means that should the Minsk agreement by some miracle be implemented, it will not bring the peace to Ukraine, the restoration of territorial integrity and sovereignty over the whole territory of Ukraine. And also the agreement itself. Maybe 2 years ago, when the first version of agreement being negotiated in Minsk, some people were thinking that it's possible to take those territories back overnight after the elections. So it's enough to conduct the elections, and then peacefully overnight those territories will turn to be again Ukrainian.
As it was before. Almost.
Yes, but right now this is not going to happen this way. So we need to have some transitional period because, first of all, there are a lot of people being killed on both sides, and people are uneasy on each other. So we need to calm down the situation. After, of course, the ceasefire, which has not been reached so far, and this is when Ukrainians are talking about the implementation of the Minsk agreement, they mainly thinking and talking about the ceasefire. This is should be the precondition of any other talks and any other activities conducted by Ukrainian state, including the changes to the legislation, preparation to elections, so far, so far, so far. So, and also means that we would need to have some transitional political and local structures that would lead us through the transitional period to the period when we will be prepared for the full-scale elections conducted on their normal legal base, when the Ukrainian law and Ukrainian society will be controlling those elections. Because right now, everything is it's not going to happen for a number of reasons, the elections in Donbass. We don't know how to finance them. We don't have the law, and it looks like that everything Ukraine is suggesting, their existing law in Ukraine, is making, for some reason, Donetsk, those occupied regions, unhappy. And we understand that Moscow is unhappy because they want Ukrainian political parties to be excluded from the process, but this is kind of joke. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to be recognized as the elections which have been conducted in accordance with the OSCE standards. So there are a lot of issues to be skeptical about the prospect of the Minsk agreement, but mainly because let's say the mechanism that Minsk is prescribing as the solution is completely against the logic of the peace settlement that the humankind is exercising all over the globe. So we need transitional period, we need transitional structures, we need to know who will finance it and who will guarantee this. Because the main issue here for Ukrainians, we do not trust Russia. So Russia has all the opportunity to stop violence, to stop fighting, to withdraw troops, to stop financing the terrorists over there, to stop supplying them with the weapons. And then it means that the ceasefire will take place immediately after this. So they're not doing this. And of course, it's making us suspicious what their intentions are.
Okay, Bogdan Yeremenko, foreign policy expert, thank you very much for coming on to First Ukraine. Russia has a special responsibility to pull back heavy weapons and enforce the Minsk agreement in eastern Ukraine. That's according to NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg. He says the high number of casualties and ceasefire violations in Donbass is, in his words, deeply concerning. However, Mr. Stoltenberg failed to elaborate on how exactly the Minsk peace deal could be implemented. The remarks were made ahead of a meeting with NATO defence ministers in Brussels this week. He explained what was on their agenda.
We are concerned about the security situation amid continued ceasefire violations in eastern Ukraine. We will also discuss the pace of Ukraine's reforms and the support provided by NATO.
Moving on now, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has prompted NATO to bolster its eastern flank, that is Poland and the Baltic states. This week, Mr. Stoltenberg announced 4 new multinational battalions will be stationed in the region. The NATO chief said these military forces are not just a deterrent, but a much bigger shift in response to new challenges. Meanwhile, these pictures are from Latvia. There and across the Baltic, the US Army in Europe has been leading training exercises for the past 3 weeks. Operation Sabre Strike aims to improve how well land and air forces from different countries work with each other. Ukrainian soldiers have also participated in NATO's Anaconda 2016 exercises in Poland this week. In one scenario, troops had to retake an occupied building. In this footage, you can see an ambush, soldiers moving in and exchanging gunfire with their enemy. Then, later on, an exercise to remove a wounded soldier quickly from the battlefield. The servicemen also had to keep civilians safe and neutralize the armed group. The multinational Lithuanian, Polish, Ukrainian brigade was involved. The drills ended today.
The unit had accomplished its task on a full scale. The illegal armed military groups were eliminated. During the mock battle, one serviceman pretended to be injured.
The biggest military exercises in Eastern Europe since the times of the Cold War lasted for 10 days and ended today. It took place on the Polish training ground Novodeba. 31,000 soldiers from 24 different countries participated in the exercises. Armoured vehicles, aircrafts, tanks and helicopters were used. The soldiers learned how to remove possible threats from the north, whilst also improving the general training and the level of cooperation. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has said the country requires a more hybrid defence to counter what was, in his words, the hybrid aggression. The head of state made these remarks during a conference at the Ministry of Defence. According to Mr. Poroshenko, a hard and active defence which defeats the meaning of the enemy's offensive actions is important, together with active diplomacy, in order to support Ukraine and sanctions against the aggressor. Also, the president said Ukraine should have an army up to NATO standards, even before considering entering NATO.
The question of the territory defense should be worked out thoroughly, including implementation of military practice of last 2 years. In the same way, we should frame a plan of mobilization and the country functioning during the wartime for the case of a large-scale invasion. Once again, I have to underline, only due to the efficiency of introducing the contract army, we did not announce the full mobilization.
Although it wasn't included to the agenda, the bill on cleansing the ranks of power has been actively discussed in Parliament. The current law now is under consideration by the Constitutional Court. In case the court abolishes a few provisions, lawmakers are preparing to adopt another version. Our correspondents found out more about the draft law and its consequences.
While the Constitutional Court considered the law on cleansing the ranks of power, Verkhovna Rada formed a more advanced version of it. According to one of the authors of the bill, MP Yegor Sobolev, from now on candidates for deputies and ministers, as well as presidential candidates, will be required to provide information whether they worked during Yanukovych time or not. Roughly speaking, Boyko must say that I am illustrated because I worked in the government of Yanukovych. Nalyvaichenko must say that I am illustrated as I am a graduate of the KGB. But if they lie and say, no, we are good, they are the grounds for their removal from the election. Radical parties support the new bill, saying that the Minister of Justice, which was responsible for this process of lustration, has worked effectively. So now we need an independent from a body. Many employees of the Interior Ministry and other security agencies avoiding the law on lustration fled to the State Penitentiary Service. If this service is under the Minister of Justice, then I have a question to the Minister of Justice, which is responsible for the implementation of the law on lustration. These are technical moments. The Venice Commission has pointed out that not the Ministry of Justice has to carry out the procedure of lustration, but a separate body which is being created. The body that takes charges of lustration does not take decisions. It doesn't specify if the person subject to lustration or not. It collects information and organization of cleansing of power process. Nevertheless, the deputies simply do not believe in fair decision on the law, which is now under consideration of the Constitutional Court. A member of Petro Poroshenko bloc, Mustafa Nayem, said that only after the dismissal of judges of the Constitutional Court who are subject to power cleansing, the law can be assessed objectively. The Constitutional Court, which was elected at the time of Yanukovych, actually provided him with a dictatorship regime, and now these people will decide on the abolition of the law on lustration. That is ridiculous. The bill, which is pending in court, violates human rights, so believes the opposition bloc. 47 deputies of the faction sent a submission to the law consideration in the Constitutional Court. According to chairman of the Venice Commission, Gianni Buchicchio, who said during the conversation with the President of Ukraine that is a very bad law. Such law has no right to exist in a democratic state. In other words, the law violates basic human rights. In the efficiency of any of the bills does not believe MP from Batkivshina Igor Lutsenko. He says lustration does not depend on whether there are new institutions or rules, but on whether the decision on lustration is to be carried out. If the first level is an imprisonment, the second level if necessary. If the first was not enough, then that is lustration process. We haven't seen any lustration or punishment of the perpetrators. So if the principle of punishing the guilty isn't implemented, then no law enforcement system and no state system will carry out the cleansing of power. The Constitutional Court continued consideration of the law on cleansing the ranks of power behind the closed doors, and for the new bill the parliament plans to vote soon, as the Venice Commission pushes the deputies to adopt the law, although the latter has claimed they haven't received Ukraine's new text on the law of lustration.
Now let's go to Euro 2016, where there's been lots of action on and off the pitch this week. Ukraine lost 2-0 to Northern Ireland last night in France. The team struggled to make a breakthrough and appeared off form compared to the previous match with Germany. Now all eyes will be on Ukraine's final match in the group stages, where they'll look to secure at least a point against Poland in Marseille next Tuesday. Meanwhile, fan zones have been set up across the Ukrainian capital for the tournament. You can see some supporters there looking a bit nervous at times during the game. Dozens of adults and children attended. They'll all be hoping for a better result next week. Yet still, there were some public disturbances during the European Football Championships. In the centre of attention, Russian soccer fans who initiated massive and violent fighting last Saturday in France. More details in the following story. Last weekend, central Marseille resembled a war zone. Hours before Russia and England fought each other on the football pitch, hundreds of opposing fans clashed. Police fired tear gas and used water cannon to disperse the crowds. This scene of disorder and street battles have marred Euro 2016. This week, France expelled 20 Russian fans, including the head of a Russian Football Supporters Federation, in connection with the violence. They were arrested en route to Lille, where their team faced Slovakia 2 days ago. UEFA, Europe's football governing body, has formally warned Russia it could be disqualified if there's any further violence by the team's fans inside the stadiums. Meanwhile, at least 36 other fans were arrested in the northern city of Lille this week after Russia's match with Slovakia. Now moving to the UK, where politicians and voters have paid their respects to Joe Cox, a British MP killed on Thursday. A man wielding a gun and knife killed the 41-year-old in an attack that has thrown a June 23 referendum on European Union membership into limbo. Cox, a supporter of Britain staying in the EU, was shot and stabbed after a meeting with residents in her constituency in northern England. She was pronounced dead just over 48 minutes later by a doctor who was trying to save her life. A 52-year-old man named in the media as Thomas Mayer was arrested by officers nearby, and weapons, including a firearm, were recovered. A terrorist attack in France, the death of an Islamic State leader, and corruption in Japan. These and other highlights of the current week. Watch now in our World Events Digest.
The new terrorist attack occurred in the suburbs of Paris. The incident took place near the house of the law enforcement officer. Terrorists ran with a knife on the 42-year-old officer who was coming back home, being dressed in civilian clothes. The man died on the spot because of stab wounds. Then the intruder broke into the house and seized the officer's wife and his 3-year-old son as the hostages. As the negotiations were unsuccessful, commanders were ordered to storm the building. Terrorist was killed. Officer's wife was found dead. The child did not suffer. Negotiating with the police, the terrorists swore their allegiance to ISIS. Later, Islamic State confirmed their responsibility for this crime. The attacker, 25-year-old, was sentenced in France to 3-year prison in 2013. Together with associates, LaRousse recruited militants in order to send them to Pakistan in Islamist training camps. 3 more suspects have been caught by police after the incident. According to the police, they are in contact with the terrorist LaRousse Aballa. In his house, police found a list of possible future victims. ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died of wounds in Syria. He was injured during the air strikes on suburbs of Raqqa. There is no information about where was killed the terrorist leader. There are several possible places: the city of Raqqa, in Mosul, or on the way Karbala, where the meeting of ISIS leader was going to be held. The information agency Amaq, which is believed to be the closest to the terrorists, announced the death of al-Baghdadi. But, to tell the truth, the rumors about his death have appeared several times before. Al-Baghdadi declared himself as caliph in 2014. Then ISIS captured large areas of Iraq and Syria. Mayor of Tokyo has resigned after allegation of civic peculation. Local media reported that Yoichi Masuzo used the official car for his weekly travel to his country cottage and to travel with his family on the coast of politic funds. His official visits abroad within last 2 years came in at $2 million. Masuzo promised to refund all the money that he received while being a mayor. Musicians from Led Zeppelin appeared in a court after accusations in plagiarism. The fragment of the famous 1971 song Stairway to Heaven was lifted from Spirit, whose song Taurus appeared 3 years before. The author of Taurus, Spirit's guitarist Randy Wolf, died in 1997, but a lawsuit was filed by his trustee. The defendants are the vocalist, Robert Plant, and the guitarist, Jimmy Page. "5 years of forced expulsion. Citizens of Japanese village of Katsurao come back home after the earthquake and Fukushima 1 nuclear disaster in 2011. Before the disaster, there were almost 1,050 inhabitants. But according to the last year's survey, only the half of the population is ready to come back. The other got used to their new places of living, shopping malls, hospitals, and other comforts of home. All of above-mentioned amenities are in decline after the disaster. Local authorities promised to provide free taxi service for the aged in order to give them possibility to get to the hospital or shopping center outside the settlement. A special delivery services of fresh food and living essentials already operates. Living statues have flooded the city of Eslinho in northern Portugal. Now, the 20th International Festival of Living Statues is held here. 34 participants from different European countries went there to take part in the festival. Some actors are so convincing that it's hard to distinguish them from real monuments. People who decided to become living statues said that it is not an easy work. One should not only be self-restrained, but also be well-trained enough and be a genius for acting. Every year, thousands of people come to see the living statues. They say they are impressed by mastery of actors. This is also a good possibility for living statues to promote their abilities. This year, Romeo and Juliet were recognized as the best one.
A concert on the occasion of the Day of Mourning and Hope on the Cathedral Square in Vilnius has taken place this week. Lithuanians commemorated their fellow countrymen who were deported to Siberia in 1941. The 75th anniversary of the beginning of the mass deportation was marked throughout the country. In Soviet times, more than 130,000 people were deported from Lithuania. Jamala, the Ukrainian singer, was invited to take part in the concert. She sang the song that won the Eurovision contest this year.
I will become the part of your history by telling you about my history. The song which won is about my family, my grand-grandmother, who came through the deportation in 1944.
In the National Museum of Arts in Kiev, 17 masterpieces that were stolen in Italy and found in Ukraine can now be seen. The paintings were recovered by Ukrainian border guards in Odessa in the beginning of May. It came out that the paintings were stolen from a museum in Verona, and now they have been returned.
I want to tell you that each of these masterpieces is priceless. For example, this is Madonna of the Coil, the early Renaissance master Pisanello. Miss Helena Zhivkova, the art critic, says that the painting is a part of a pictorial altar. The Virgin Mary is sitting inside a garden, where each flower symbolizes something. For instance, rose means Mary's suffering. Also, here is the coil, a symbol of salvation, and two goldfinches, symbols of Christ.
Марію коронують, бачите, два янголи.
One can see that two angels are crowning Mary. It symbolizes that Mary Madonna is the Queen of Heaven.
Марія Мадонна є царицею небесною.
On the other side, she is not enthroned, she sits directly on the ground, on a pillow. This is a kind of Madonna of humility, because here she is an ordinary woman.
Мадонни замилування.
Along with this work, there are another 16 paintings of the Renaissance period. That is a work of Tintoretto, Madonna nursing the baby Christ. Art critics say such exhibition in Ukraine didn't occur for at least 30 years. They are joking that it would be better the exhibition have never been here, as in fact the paintings trapped to Ukraine illegally. In November 2015, the unknown robbers had stolen them from the Museum of Castelvecchio in Italian city of Verona. And these are footages dated May 2016. Ukrainian border guards, together with the employees of military prosecutor office, have found a cache with paintings on Turinchuk Island in Odessa region. The paintings have been prepared for smuggling from Ukraine to the territory of Moldova. The investigation also identified cross-border criminal group members, including citizens of Ukraine, Moldova and Russia. This exhibition represents the very responsible attitude of Ukraine and Ukrainian authorities as to our cultural heritage, so to the cultural heritage of European nations. At the moment, the paintings require restoration. In particular, they have no solid foundation. The robbers cut them canvases out of the frames. Only for exhibiting museum workers have made such image frames on the easels. The restoration works will be done in Verona.
Da qua alla fine dell'anno I cittadini ucraini
In gratitude, Ukrainian citizens will be able to visit all the museums of Verona till the end of 2016 for free.
come segno di riconoscenza della nostra città.
And in Ukraine, the artworks could be seen for 10 days in the Hanenko Museum of Arts in Kiev.
This has been the weekly newscast with me, Tom Bell, here on First Ukraine. Thanks for watching.